Hi everyone, and welcome to Interaction of Heredity and Environment. Here's your vocab, pause if you need to. Okay, so we are going to be talking about nature and nurture today. So let's be clear about what those two words mean. Nature means our genetics. It is our biology, what we are given at birth. Nurture is our environment. This is our childhood experiences. This is the school that we go to. This is our stressors, the things that happen to us. And both of these things together, nature and nurture, impact how we think, feel, and behave. This is the nature-nurture issue. We look at how much of something is nature and how much of something is nurture. Now, just to be clear, in any one individual, we cannot determine, unless there are certain things that we know are 100% genetics, right? Or 100% nurture, we cannot say, for example, how much of your diagnosed anxiety is nature and how much of it is nurture. You are like a cake, okay? You are the egg, the sugar, the oil. You are all of those things. And we can't pinpoint a specific part of the cake and say, oh, that part of the cake is just egg. It is when we step back and we look at the entire human genome and we look at how heritable, meaning how genetic a trait is, that we can determine if it leans genetic or if it leans like a nurture issue. So one thing that we look at in this debate is natural selection, because through evolution, there are certain traits. For example, humans are very social. This helped us survive and reproduce. So the humans that were not at all social, and I don't mean introverted, which by the way, doesn't mean maybe what you think it means, but the ones that weren't social or weren't able to socialize did not survive and reproduce, right? So that is natural selection. That is nurture playing on our genetics, and the survival of that fittest group survive. So nurture plays on nature. We are given this set of DNA, and then nurture can impact it. So there are two fields of study when we look at nature and nurture. The first is evolutionary psychology. And this is the study of evolution, right? So think of Darwin, natural selection. And we are using those principles of natural selection to understand, why are human beings so social? How are we alike? What evolutionary reason is there for that? Behavior genetics is studying the influence of genetics and environment and trying to understand, why are we different? How much of that is your genes and how much of that is your environment? So where are you in this? And again, we can't specifically find you personally, but the human genome at large. So contemporary science says that both, again, play a role. I've already said this. So nurture is working on what nature has given us. Everything is both psychological, how we think, how we feel, and biological. For example, depression is both biological, we can see it chemically in the brain, and it is also psychological. We can think the way we think and the way we feel is affected by it. It is both. So everything that is psychology is also biology, because they're intertwined and cannot be untwined. So let's first start with something from evolutionary psych. So evolutionary psych did this study, the fox study, where they took a bunch of foxes on a farm in Russia, and through multiple generations, they were able to just keep breeding the tamest foxes until they had, look at this, a domesticated fox. How cute. So this shows us, this is an artificial natural selection process to show us how this is, again, forcing a certain gene mutation. Think about like dog breeds and how they came up with certain dog breeds. They are forcing like a specific like length of nose or length of tail that genetic mutation, which starts as a random error, but in the real world, not artificially created by humans, but in the real world, sometimes those random errors are best for survival, and so they keep going. Now, this genetic leash is looser on humans because we have adapted. I am sitting in a chair that was like made for us to adapt to what is comfortable. Let's look at the human genome. So again, the human genome is this common set of genes. So when we take the entire human species, the human genome are all of the genes that we as humans could possess. Doesn't mean that you don't possess all of the human genome. But when we look at this, we find 95% of the genetic variations occur within the same population. So for example, 2 South Africans, 2 Englishmen, 2 Singaporeans. Like, it is not, the differences do not come when we look at a South African versus someone from Russia. Those are not where we see the differences. We see the differences within the same group, within Russia, within South Africa. So when we are discussing, for example, race, people think that like genetically we are different, and that is not true. We are actually more different than the people within our group than we are with groups that are different from us. And I know that's difficult to understand, and there are plenty of research articles that you could like Google about this if this is something of your interest. But we're just dipping our toes into this topic. We are genetically predisposed to think and act in ways that promote our survival and reproduction. We've already discussed this. But those things, for example, being attracted to sugary and fatty foods, were helpful for our survival because we had to hunt and forage for food. We no longer have to do that. There's a Dunkin' Donuts at every corner, right? So we are genetically prepared for a world that no longer exists. And that, isn't really going to always set us up for the best lifestyle. But again, like, this genetic leash is looser on humans. So like we're still surviving and reproducing, even though the mutations aren't necessarily best for us right now. So now let's flip the switch to look at behavior genetics. So remember, these people are studying differences between how much of something is environmental and how much of something is genetic. So we look at environment and heredity. And when we look at a person has 46 chromosomes, 23 from each parent, 20,000 genes together. So look at, here is like a DNA molecule. This is a chromosome, right? So these are the different levels. So all these chromosomes create this chain, creates this DNA molecule, and this DNA molecule is a gene. So again, we are looking at whether or not you get these 20,000 genes. You might have a gene for depression and never get depressed. You never be experience depression because that gene remains inactive in you. So this is an example of behavior genetics. You have the heredity, you have the gene factor, but your environment has been so that gene never gets expressed. So this is what behavior genetics look at. We can also look at these slight differences. So we are mostly alike. Humans together, again, are 99% alike. But even when we look at chimpanzees, which is our most alike mammal on Earth currently, 96% identical to chimpanzees. And when we look at the functionally important traits in DNA, it's 99.4 alike to chimpanzees. You might feel weird going to the zoo now, just looking at them in the zoo. So these slight variations do matter, right? When you look at the chimpanzee and you look at yourself, or when you look at your sibling, slight variations do matter. And that's because for many reasons. But one of those things is because many traits are polygenetic, meaning it is multiple genes, right? Here's a gene. It takes multiple genes to determine your intelligence, the genetic factor of your intelligence. All of this here that was listed in your textbook these are examples of traits that are polygenetic. And we can also look at family studies, look at that gene pool and see like why you got a certain thing in your gene pool and like your sibling or your parent didn't. One way that we study these differences is we look at identical twins, also known as monozygotic twins. So a monozygotic twin is developed from one egg and one sperm. Typically, they share a placenta. So they are in utero together. In utero is an environmental factor. And the shared placenta is an environmental factor, how they're receiving nutrients. Fraternal twins are no more alike than two siblings, okay? They have a separate sperm, separate egg, okay? Separate placentas. So they are in utero together. They're experiencing the same environment, but genetically, they are just as much alike as siblings and not at all like identical twins. So please don't tell your fraternal twins that they act so much like their twin. It's like telling you that you act like your sibling, which I guess could be true, right? But I don't think they like that. So we can look at these twin studies and see, for example, identical twins with autism spectrum disorder, there's a 3 in 4 chance that the other twin will also have ASD. But for fraternal twins, that factor is 1 in 3. So compared with fraternal twins, identical twins are going to be a lot more alike in many experiences, personality, politics, etc. We can look at, unfortunately, there are several instances where identical twins have been separated at birth, such as the Bagata brothers. And so when they are reunited, they can really compare and see that those differences are maybe like intelligence scores because of their access to education, because of their nutrition, because of their poverty experiences. But things like personality, that is very genetic. And so another way we study this is we look at adoptive studies. And when we look at adoptive studies, we find that personality is higher on that genetic spectrum. You are more like your bio parent than your adoptive parent in terms of personality. But in so many ways, your environment does matter. We can look at those studies of people with depression, the bio parent with depression, the child has that gene pool, that predisposition, but they're 20% less likely to develop depression because of the different environment experience. And so environment does matter. Even though we're talking about little differences, it makes an impact. Okay, so we've been talking about how you're given DNA and then the environment plays a role on it, right? This is gene environment interaction. So when the effect of like your schooling, maybe schooling's a bad example, depends on another factor such as your genes. So let's take the example here from your textbook. Who is most at risk of permanent harm from stress or abuse? So when we look at the genes you've been given and then like your environment, then that can affect whether or not that certain gene is expressed. So this can help us like who is most likely to benefit from certain interventions, and how can we predict these physical and mental health like issues and prevent them. Again, looking at the interaction of genes and environment, let's look at the word epigenetics. So epigenetics here is your DNA, right? We're studying it at the molecular level. It's so hard to say. And we are trying to understand what determines if this anxiety gene is expressed or not. And so this is what epigenetics study. So what environmental triggers can make that gene expressed? So diet, drugs, stress, childhood trauma, poverty is a huge one. These can all like affect what is expressed and not. But it is not just within you, it is in multiple generations, okay? According to research, and this is still very new research, some scientists are not convinced of this, but they are finding, studies are showing that, for example, this woman here is smoking while pregnant. She is carrying a baby girl. Baby girls are born with all of their eggs. Remember, you're an egg and a sperm, right? She is born with all of her eggs, which means that egg, if it becomes, someday that egg is going to become this full-grown woman here, okay? So this egg is also being affected by this environment. So when she has her baby's egg was technically inside of the grandma. So if you think about this, your bio grandma had your bio mom inside of her, right? And when your bio mom was born, she was born with all her eggs, which means she was born with you. And so you were in that environment in utero, right? Just sitting as an egg. And now you are a full-grown person. You have your eggs if you are by a woman, and right, that could have an effect up to 3 generations. So that's nature and nurture having this like crazy effect. And we can look at all sorts of things. This is just smoking as an example. We look at Holocaust survivors and the impact of stress. We can look at slavery. We can look at prisoners of war, all sorts of things. So to sum it up, nature is our genes, environment is nurture. These two things play on it. We are given our nature, and nurture plays on that. We look at evolutionary psych, how much are we alike? Behavior geneticists, how do we differ? We look at the whole human genome, all the instructions of making a human, and we try to understand how we are different and alike. We look at identical twins, fraternal twins. We look at adoption studies. And remember that epigenetics, the environment can change what genes get expressed and what don't. So I hope you've enjoyed this mod, and I will see you in class. Bye, guys.